Shalom, Bethel family. It is Thursday time once again to review our Torah talk, the sermon this past week that we had in the sanctuary here at Congregation Bethel in Norfolk. Last week, the Torah reading was called Tetzaveh. It was all about the Kohanim and the dress that they wore, the priests in the temple and the tabernacle, and the special garments that were designed for them. But it was also a Shabbat called Zachor. In fact, today, as I'm recording this on Thursday, it is Purim. And the Shabbat before Purim is known as Zachor, the Shabbat of Remembrance. On this Shabbat, we are commanded to remember Amalek, the wicked nation who attacked the Israelites after the parting of the Red Sea. See, they attacked us from the rear, where the weakest non-soldiers would be traveling. Targeting civilians is a particularly despicable way to do battle. So what is the connection between that and Purim? Well, Haman and all anti-Semites are said to be the spiritual descendants of Amalek. So on the Shabbat before Purim, we spend a serious few minutes remembering that had things gone just a little bit differently, Purim may not have ended up being such a happy holiday. This Shabbat Zachor, I wanted to speak less about pure anti-Semitism and more about what makes Amalek so contemptible in the first place. Their egregious attack on the weak who could not defend themselves. And it is in that context that I want to discuss the slaughter of 14 students and 3 educators at the Marjory Stoneman Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida, and my misgivings about the growing youth movement demanding action to change the status quo. There is a classic Midrash. It's actually one of my favorites. The story goes that when God met the Jewish people on Mount Sinai, God asked them, "Look, I've got this wonderful gift for you called the Torah, but what will you give me as a pledge so that I know you will care for it well?" The people get together and the elders discuss, and they come back and they say, "God, if you give us this Torah, we'll give you all of our gold." God replied, "What do I need with your gold?" So the people go back and the elders and they gather, and gold isn't enough? Okay, fine. They come back to God, they say, "Not only will we give you all of our gold, we'll give you all of our possessions, everything of value, gold and silver, but also jewels and fine cloths and dyes and skins, everything we have that's valuable, we'll give that to you as a pledge in return for this Torah." God replied, "You don't get it. What do I need with your material things at all?" So finally the people go back and they, "What are we going to do? We want to get this Torah." They go round and round and round. Finally they come back, they say, "Okay, God, if you give us the gift of the Torah, we pledge to you our children for all time." And God agrees. I've always found this story to be very powerful. It helps explain the emphasis in Judaism on educating our children. It also explains why the most important generation in Judaism is not one of the great generations of our ancestors, not those who left Egypt and received the Torah at Sinai, not those who entered and conquered the land of Israel, not even the generations of our great earliest Jews, not Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Rebekah and Jacob and Leah and Rachel. No, the most important generation in the history of Judaism is always the next one. That's why I'm a little ambivalent about the movement being launched across the country by the survivors of the massacre in Parkland. Now, please don't get me wrong. I fully support the prerogative of those poor teenagers to react and heal and advocate in whatever way helps. I cannot imagine, I don't even want to try to imagine the trauma that they have been through, and wouldn't even begin to judge how they should heal. In fact, as a parent with a child in public school and with 3 more who will be in public school, I fully support their efforts to raise the profile of this issue and to demand that something be done to change the status quo. So what's my ambivalence? I can't help but feel that we have failed these children and are continuing to fail them. Honestly, what kind of society have we created where children have to stand up on their own, put their learning on hold, subject themselves to public judgment and ridicule, and plead with grown-up society for their right to feel safe in school, where they spend most of their waking hours? And I get why they feel the need to do so. This grown-up society has become so inured to these shootings that they barely stay in the news for a week. While these kids go to school week after week, month after month, traumatized by active shooter lockdown drills, viewing their peers with suspicion, and facing every day with fear of what could happen to them. And I've already seen it just 2 weeks later, even with all the efforts of these kids, the shooting and the problems with controlling mass shootings in this country already starting to drop out of the news, already starting to become quiet. So I get why these kids are stepping up on their own behalfs. What choice do they have? I just don't understand why we are leaving it to them. Over the past several days now, it's been maybe a week and a half, I've heard hopeful statements from several adults. Well, now that the students are involved, maybe those in power will listen. How pathetic have we become that we are now leaving our children to advocate on behalf of their own safety? How impotent are we to create change that we need to rely on teenagers to do it for us? How derelict has this grown-up society become in our duties to our children that we don't even feel ashamed or embarrassed leaving the discussion and the advocacy in their hands? Is this the behavior of a society that understands that our children are our most valuable pledge? We should not be letting our children stand alone. It isn't the way of the Torah, and it shouldn't be the way of an enlightened and ethical society. Look, I'm not advocating for any one specific policy, but I am advocating for a real change in attitude toward the issue of gun violence in our schools and how we go about protecting our children. It is a broken society that insists that they should look out for themselves. I don't know what the alternative is. That's not my job as rabbi. But I know that our society is not functioning the way it should when we are not taking care of our children, which means that those who do make policy need to get to work. We all know who the hero of the Megillah is, right? They even named it after her. But if the Jewish people of Persia had left Esther to advocate on her own, tragedy would not have been averted. It is not only that all the people fasted for 3 days on her behalf before she took the brave step of standing up to the king. That's the same as all of us saying, good for these kids getting involved and being heard. It's nice, but it's not enough. No, the key is what happens after Esther confronts the king. See, apparently once a king made a decree at that time, it couldn't simply be undone, even by that king. Therefore, Mordecai and the king ordered that the Jews of Shushan be able to defend themselves, be allowed to defend themselves. And when the day of the great pogrom that Haman had planned came along, all the Jews stood up and did defend themselves. And the anti-Semites among the Persians were inspired with fear, and they stood down. Now, I'm not saying, obviously, that these kids should be allowed to defend themselves. It's absolutely wrong. It's that the strong among us, the adults among us, those who are charged with protecting the next generation, which is all of us, need to stand up and have their backs. If these kids are raising the profile of school shootings all the way up to the highest offices in the land, right? If them doing that is the same as Esther going to the king, these kids are our Esther, then our role is not simply to pat them on the back and say, good job. It is to be ready to support them and join them in raising that awareness of the issue and insisting that the status quo is not an option. A shooting in a school on average every 60 hours in this country, and 3 horrifying mass shootings in Florida and Texas in the last 5 months. We need to join them in this advocacy. We need to be calling our legislators, state and national, and saying this issue is important and it matters enough to me that will affect my support for you. When these kids step out to rally, we need to stop and say, yes, we have your back. I wish you could be back in school learning because we're going to take care of this for you because that's our job so you can do yours. That's what we need to do. That's what this holiday calls for. As we remember the Amalekites, as we celebrate this Purim, and we curse those who prey on the weakest among us, let us pledge ourselves to the opposite, to protect our children, to advocate on their behalf. And let us remember that when our children are left on an island to speak on behalf of their own safety, we can be hopeful, we can be inspired, but we should also be a little ashamed to let them stand alone. And let's pledge that we will never make them do that again. Wish you a Shabbat Shalom and a Chag Sameach, a very happy Purim.